He didn't say a word when the kid kicked over the recycling bin, didn't flinch when the half-full iced coffee sloshed out onto his shoe. Just looked down, breathed out slow, and reached for the paper towels tucked into the side pocket of his coveralls. One knee to the floor, old joints cracking like gravel under weight. He wiped it all up while the young man laughed and clinked cold brew with his two friends. "Clean up on aisle tech," the kid smirked, nudging the toe of his shoe near the puddle. "Get that before the VCs show up, yeah?" The others chuckled, their lanyards swinging with startup logo pride. Robert just nodded once, pressed the last napkin flat to the tile, and stood back up like he had all the time in the world. He'd been in that building every weekday for nearly 5 years. Same navy coveralls, same soft-soled shoes, same slow gait that made him disappear into corners and doorframes. They'd seen him every day, and still, not a single one of them knew his last name. That was the way he wanted it. Let them think he was just the janitor. Let them mutter when he walked into the restroom with his bucket or quietly vacuumed while they rehearsed their startup pitch deck for the 15th time. He'd watched this new crowd come and go, loud, young, caffeinated, entitled. Same slides, different font. Robert had been around long enough to see the last 2 companies in this building go belly up. Startups with glossy mission statements and no soul. Back then, they at least had the courtesy to greet him. Not this one. Not Zentech. Not Mr. Coffee Spill and his crew. These new boys barely looked at him. He was just background noise to them, like the elevator chime or the humming fridge. And when they did look, it was to sneer or scoff or snap their fingers for the mop. But Robert knew every inch of this building, not just the walls and floors or the bones of it. The electrical system he had rewired himself, the leaky roof he'd climbed up and patched before a storm rolled in, the boiler he personally funded when the last owner went bankrupt, because when the building hit foreclosure, he bought it quietly, in cash. And he never corrected the assumption that he was just staff. That morning he had arrived early, like always, long before the sun rose, long before the VC investors were due. He mopped the marble lobby, checked the backup generator, made sure the air conditioning didn't give out in the conference room. This building might have had Zintech's logo on the door, but the deed had his name. He passed by their CEO, or Chief Product Evangelist as the business card said, on the 2nd floor. Blonde, loud, and far too proud for a man who hadn't broken even in 3 fiscal quarters. "Hey!" the CEO had barked, snapping his fingers toward Robert. "Careful with that mop, this floor's got to look perfect today. We've got real money coming in. Try not to, be in the way." Robert had nodded, eyes steady. "Yes, sir." And that was what did it. The sir. Said soft. Said still. Said with the calm of a man who knew something they didn't. They called him the janitor. But that afternoon, when the boardroom doors opened, he wouldn't be mopping, he'd be sitting at the head of the table. There was something about being underestimated that made the air feel quieter. As Robert stepped out into the back stairwell, the one employees never used, too dusty for their sneakers, too dim for their selfies, he let the sound of their chatter fade behind the steel door. He liked these moments. Just him, the hum of the building's breath, ductwork vibrating faintly overhead, pipes creaking against decades-old foundations, the echo of his steps on concrete. She was an old building, worn in places, but still solid, reliable, like him. He stopped on the 4th floor and opened the utility closet. Inside, nestled between a stack of filters and a rusting red fire extinguisher, was a safe. Most folks wouldn't have noticed it, not unless they were really looking. Robert entered the code without hesitation. Click. Inside, one copy of the building's deed still crisp, a thick blue folder filled with zoning paperwork and compliance inspections, and an envelope marked Emergency Protocol, Zintech. He took out the folder, checked the latest leasing terms. The rent was 6 months past due. Robert had given them grace. He'd sat back, listened to their loud mouths talk about revolutionizing vertical market integration, while they ignored overdue invoices from vendors, skipped out on paying the janitorial contractor, which had been him in name too, since they wanted to avoid the cost of a proper cleaning service. He didn't mind, that was the point. They hadn't just mistaken him for a janitor. They'd hired him as one, direct, under the table, cash, no questions. And now they owed him both ways. As Robert stepped out of the closet and into the empty hallway, he caught sight of his own reflection in the dark glass. Creased forehead, salt and pepper beard, shoulders that still held weight without needing to prove it. He didn't look like a man who owned much. That was by design. He made his way back down to the lobby. There were voices rising behind the double glass doors, nervous, animated. The VC team had arrived, suits, briefcases, forced grins. Robert slipped past them unnoticed, wheeling his bucket down the hallway. "First, we're projecting Q3 profitability with the new platform," one of the execs was saying. Voice thin with panic, dressed as confidence. "We just need one more round of funding to scale properly." One of the investors, a sharp-eyed black woman in a cobalt blazer, raised an eyebrow. "Is that before or after your rent's caught up?" Silence. Robert smiled to himself. She knew. He tapped the elevator button but didn't enter. Instead, he waited, letting the glass doors shut behind them. "Hey!" a voice called out behind him. He turned. It was the same kid from earlier, the one who'd kicked the recycling bin. Brighter shirt now, blazer on, trying to look like something he wasn't built to be. "We've got guests, old man," the kid sneered. "You need to stay out of the conference wing, got it? This is a real pitch, not the time for brooms and bleach smells." Robert stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked past him, to the flicker of the conference room lights behind the frosted glass, to the cushy chairs lined with people too young to know what real work was. "Noted," Robert said simply. And he turned, walked into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. Not one of them had ever bothered to check what was up there. They assumed it was storage, maybe some dusty server room, but above their heads was a penthouse office, floor-to-ceiling windows, leather chairs, hardwood floors Robert had hand-sanded himself. A solid desk facing out toward the skyline. No nameplate, no assistant, just quiet power. As the doors opened and he stepped inside, the hum of the city welcomed him like an old friend. Robert set the folder on the desk. They thought they were pitching for control. They didn't know the meeting wasn't for them at all. The elevator dinged again, this time on the top floor, and Robert didn't need to turn around to know who stepped in. "Morning, Mr. Givens," said a calm voice, rich and measured. "Right on time, Evelyn," he replied, still looking out over the skyline. She moved with the kind of grace people mistook for background noise, the same way they mistook Robert for furniture. But Evelyn Davis was no background. She was the lawyer who'd handled the real estate buyout 7 years ago, the one who caught the previous owner skimming from tax deferments, and the one who drew up every clause in the lease that Zintech had been ignoring. She pulled out a chair across from him and sat, unfolding her leather portfolio. "I brought the breach notices and your pre-signed authorization, in case you want to proceed today." Robert's hands rested calmly on the arms of the chair. "Let's wait and see what they say in there first." Evelyn gave a soft laugh. "You always give people too much rope." "Some tie it into something useful," Robert replied. "Others hang themselves with it." He stood slow but steady and walked toward the coat rack. Hung there was the only suit he ever wore, charcoal gray, hand-tailored back when he still cared about impressions. He slipped out of the coveralls, folded them neatly and buttoned the blazer without looking in the mirror. He didn't need to. Evelyn looked him over once. "You're going to give that boy a heart attack." Robert smiled faintly. "He'll be all right, eventually." Downstairs, the energy had shifted. Inside the glass-walled conference room, The Zintech team sat lined up like a row of students waiting to be graded. Their CEO, Chad Dempsey, was mid-sentence, spinning jargon like a magician pulling scarves from his throat. We've been aggressively scaling our user acquisition funnel through micro-influencer segmentation, and our new UI is... The black woman in the cobalt blazer raised her hand. "Before you keep going," she interrupted, "can someone explain why your rent hasn't been paid in 6 months?" Chad's face twitched. He looked sideways at Mark, the CFO, then back. "That's a temporary cash flow issue. Our funding cycle is..." "And yet," she said, flipping a page, "you managed to approve $38,000 in travel expenses in Q1, mostly to conferences in Aspen and South Beach." Chad laughed awkwardly. "Those were essential brand exposure opportunities." She raised her brows. "Interesting, because we called the building owner for clarification, and they said they'd be joining this meeting." Chad blinked. You what?" That was the moment the elevator dinged again. The glass doors opened, and Robert walked in. Suit pressed, shoes shining, not a mop in sight. For a split second, no one moved. The Zintech team just stared. The kid who'd kicked the recycling bin was sitting in the back. His jaw dropped open like a broken drawer. Chad stood up, confused, waving an uncertain hand. "Sorry, this area's restricted during..." "Sit down, Mr. Dempsey," Evelyn said, stepping in behind Robert. Robert walked to the head of the table. Calm, not a word yet. He looked at the investors. He nodded once, then he looked at Chad. "Mr. Dempsey, I believe you've been occupying Suite 4B under the name Zintech Innovations for, let's see, 18 months? Chad's face paled. Yeah. Who are you?" "I'm the man whose building you've been disrespecting," Robert said, folding his hands on the table. "I'm also the man who's given you every chance to do right by your vendors, your contractors, and your word." Murmurs. The cobalt blazer investor smiled slightly. "There it is." Robert didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I've watched you," he continued. "Watched you lie to your staff. Walk past people without even a hello. Let your company rot from the inside while you posted about grind culture on LinkedIn." He slid a file across the table. "These are your notices of lease termination. You have 14 days to vacate. Evelyn will walk you through the process." Chad sputtered. Wait, we've got VCs here. You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious. But you were cleaning the..." Robert looked him in the eye. "I was protecting my investment. Turns out you were the mess." He stood, buttoned his jacket, and turned to the investors. "If you're looking to fund something real," he said, "let me show you a few companies that actually understand what work looks like." And with that he walked out, calm, quiet, the sound of stunned silence echoing behind him. For the first time since moving in, Zintech's conference room was actually quiet. No click-clack of keyboards, no jargon echoing off the glass. Just the kind of silence that pressed on the chest like a heavy coat. The kind that made you realize, maybe too late, that someone had been watching the whole time. Robert took the back elevator down. He didn't need to stay for the chaos. Evelyn would handle it. That's why he trusted her. She never talked fast or loud. She just let the paperwork do the shouting. By the time Robert reached the lobby again, the energy had changed. The front desk receptionist, the same one who never looked up when he passed, was suddenly standing. "Good morning, sir," she said, voice tight and too polite. Robert gave her a nod. "Morning." He kept walking, past the vending machines, past the framed Zintech posters bragging about disruption culture, past the office he'd once mopped at 2 a.m. when a pipe burst and soaked the carpet. And no one even said thank you. He stepped outside into the sunlight. And finally, he let his shoulders drop. The city moved around him, honking horns, people shouting into phones, couriers weaving through traffic. But for a moment, Robert just stood still. The breeze moved through his jacket like it knew he needed that pause. Because this wasn't just about Symbolic. It wasn't just about some startup kids getting their comeuppance. It was about all the times. All the boardrooms he'd built but wasn't allowed to enter. All the deals he'd brokered with someone else's face on the paperwork. All the times they assumed he was less than because of how he looked, how he dressed, how quiet he was. And he had swallowed it for years, until he owned the whole damn building. Later that afternoon, Robert returned, not to sweep floors, but to meet someone. A knock on the glass outside the ground floor cafe signaled her arrival. "Uncle Rob," she grinned, pushing the door open with a laptop tucked under one arm. "I still can't believe you didn't tell me." She was in her 20s, hair in tight coils, a crossbody bag slung low. Her name was Nia, and she was the reason Robert had built all this in silence. Her tech startup, Real Tech, Real Purpose, was still operating out of her tiny one-bedroom, but not anymore. "I wanted you to earn it without my name opening doors," Robert said softly. But now the door's open. He slid a folder toward her across the cafe table. "Suite 6A, lease already signed, rent $1. Her eyes widened. "What? $1, monthly. I'll call it mentoring." She laughed, tearful and disbelieving. "Uncle Rob, you serious?" "Dead serious. But you run this place right. Respect the cleaners. Speak to the mailman. Know the security guard's name." Nia nodded, her voice cracking. "Always." "And don't hire fools who wear sunglasses inside," he added with a smirk. They both laughed. But there was a softness behind his smile, the kind of tired joy that only comes after decades of being invisible. He sipped his coffee, slow and steady. Let them call him Janitor, because from now on, he was the doorman to someone else's future. 2 days later, the movers came. Cardboard boxes scraped across the marble floors. Startup slogans peeled from glass walls. Office chairs clattered as they were wheeled down the hallway like relics of a failed religion. Symbolic was officially gone. Not with a bang, but with bruised pride, whispered excuses, and cardboard dust in the air. Robert watched from the mezzanine, silent, still in his suit. He'd shown up early, not because he needed to, but because he liked to see the beginning of things, and sometimes the endings too. Below him, Chad Dempsey was directing 2 movers to pack up the neon "Hustle Hard" sign, still clinging desperately to some sense of identity. His once perfect hair looked ruffled, his shirt untucked. Whatever pitch he thought he was giving that day, it had unraveled. Robert made his way down the stairs slowly. He didn't say anything at first, just walked past the movers, over to the wall where a small plaque hung by the elevator. No one ever noticed it. He reached up and wiped a thin layer of dust from the edge. It read, "Givens Commercial Trust, Esther, 1998, built on respect, operated with purpose." Chad finally noticed him. His mouth opened like he wanted to speak, maybe apologize, maybe beg. But Robert just looked at him and said, "You left the break room a mess." Chad blinked. "What?" 15 months. Not once did anyone clean out that fridge. Mold on the bottom shelf, spilled oat milk, whole community microwave stank of fish. And every week I wiped it down. Every week. Chad looked down. "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know." Robert leaned in slightly. "You built a company, but you never built culture. You hired clones of yourself and ignored the people who made this place run. Folks like me. Like the security guard you never learned the name of. Like the delivery guy you left waiting in the rain. You thought you were building an empire." Robert's voice dropped low. "You were just squatting in mine." Chad said nothing, just nodded. Embarrassed, exposed. Robert didn't gloat, didn't smirk, just turned and walked away, past the empty desks, past the echo of what they thought was power. Upstairs, Suite 6A looked different. Nia had already brought in plants. A mural in progress lined the back wall, a mosaic of black innovators through time: Katherine Johnson, Lonnie Johnson, Mae Jemison. She was building something with roots. Robert stepped into the office quietly. She was at the whiteboard, sketching out some app design, lost in her own world. "Need help?" he asked. She turned, smiled. "Only if you're good at UI." He raised an eyebrow. "I built half this building with my own hands. You think I can't sketch a login page?" They both laughed. But in the silence that followed, he noticed the framed photo she'd placed on her desk. It was of him, in coveralls, holding a mop, standing outside the building in 2019, looking away from the camera. "Where'd you get that?" he asked. "I took it. Back when I was working at that cafe across the street, I used to see you every morning." Robert stared at it, quiet. "I didn't know who you were back then," Nia said. "But I could tell. The way you carried yourself, like you owned something." He looked at her. "I did." Downstairs, a young woman entered the lobby in a smart grey blazer. She looked lost, glanced at the directory, then at the elevators. Robert stepped out just as the doors opened. "Can I help you find something?" She smiled. "Yeah, I'm looking for Suite 6A. Interview for a junior dev role." He nodded. "Right this way." She followed, not knowing who he was, not assuming what he wasn't. And Robert smiled. Because for the first time in a long time, this building felt alive again. By the end of the week, something strange started happening. People started greeting him. Not everyone, not all at once, but enough to notice. The barista downstairs, the same one who once slid his coffee across the counter without eye contact, now smiled when she saw him, said, "Morning, Mr. Givens," with something close to respect. The mail carrier tipped his hat. The new front desk guy, young, nervous but eager, had started standing whenever Robert passed. It wasn't just the suit, or the reveal. It was the silence breaking. The word had gotten around. Not through press releases or headlines. Robert never needed his name in gold foil. It spread the old-fashioned way. Whispered, carried, admired. Quiet dignity had a weight to it. And when it dropped, people felt it in their spine. Still, not everyone was thrilled. That Friday, just after sunset, Robert got a visitor. He was sitting in the rooftop garden, his favorite hidden spot above the 6th floor, the one he'd had built with leftover grant money years ago, back when he tried to get a non-profit co-op going in the building. The city had buried it in permits, but the garden stayed. He heard the footsteps before he saw the man. Chad Dempsey. No blazer this time, just a hoodie and jeans, hands in his pockets, looking unsure, like a man who wasn't used to asking for anything. "Mr. Givens," he said, voice low. Robert didn't move, just looked out at the city lights. "You know," Chad said, "I used to think this place was lucky to have us. Zintech, I mean. Thought we were changing the game. But we weren't even playing it right." Robert didn't respond. Chad stepped closer. "I wanted to say, I get it now. What you did. What I didn't see." Robert finally looked at him. "What is it you think you get?" "That it was never about the title or the office. It's about what you build, who you lift." Robert nodded once. Let the silence stretch. Nia's team was growing. 3 new hires, 2 interns, one older woman in her 50s, a former engineer who'd left the industry after being pushed out by younger execs. Now she was mentoring the interns like they were her own. The 6th floor buzzed with energy. Not noise, not ego, just energy. Robert walked through not as a shadow, but as something deeper, a root, a foundation. He passed by Nia's office. She was speaking with a new client on Zoom, pitching software to help local schools track student engagement, and not in the creepy surveillance way. He smiled. She didn't see him, didn't need to. She was standing on her own. That afternoon, he stepped into the elevator one more time. The new receptionist pressed the button for him without asking. "What floor, sir?" He smiled. "All of them." There was something poetic about Tuesdays, not flashy like Monday, with all its false urgency and tight blazers, not lazy like Friday, when folks already had one foot out the door. No, Tuesday was for doing. And Robert liked doing. That morning he pulled into the back lot like always. Same parking spot, same slow stroll through the service entrance. Not because he had to anymore, but because it kept him grounded. The building had its main lobby, its glass turnstiles and reception desk. But the real soul of the place, that lived in the boiler room, the freight elevator, the maintenance crawl space nobody dared enter since the raccoon incident of 2021. Robert knew every pipe, every fuse, every creak in the walls. This building had memory, and he made sure it remembered who cared for it when no one else did. As he walked the lower halls, an older maintenance man approached. "Mr. Givens," he said, removing his cap. "You got a minute?" Robert nodded. "Of course, Marvin. What's up?" Marvin hesitated. He'd been around longer than most, never disrespectful but always cautious, like he still couldn't quite believe the man he used to eat lunch next to now owned the very ground under his boots. "It's about the new tenant on 3C, Marvin said. "One of the younger ones. He said something about not wanting old hands fixing his equipment." Robert's expression didn't change, but his chest tightened. "What exactly did he say?" Marvin rubbed the back of his neck. "Said if it wasn't someone with a tech degree, he didn't want 'em touching the system. Called me outdated." Robert's eyes lowered. Quiet. "I'll handle it." Suite 3C was filled with sleek chrome desks and giant curved monitors. The startup was called PulseGrid, some flashy AI-fueled workflow company run by two brothers with matching tattoos and a TikTok following. Robert entered the suite slowly. Calm. The younger one, Gavin, according to the door plate, was fiddling with a coffee machine that probably cost more than Marvin's entire month's salary. "Hey," Gavin said, barely looking up. "Unless you're the IT guy, I don't need anything." Robert stepped closer. "I heard you had a problem with the HVAC sensors." Gavin turned, finally registering who he was. "Oh, right, you're that guy from... Wait, aren't you the building..." Robert didn't answer. He just walked over, opened a side panel on the wall, and reset the circuit with 3 flicks of his fingers. The hum of airflow resumed instantly. Gavin blinked. "Whoa, okay, cool trick." Robert stood straight. "You told Marvin not to touch it." Gavin shrugged. "No offense, I just figured... he's been around a while, right?" Robert stepped in, just enough to quiet the room. "Let me teach you something," he said. Gavin nodded, suddenly attentive. "This building..." Robert tapped the wall. "Every wire, every vent, every light, Marvin's hands have been on it. Fixed it in the middle of snowstorms, crawled through a flooded basement to keep your power running during the blackout. If this place had a heart, Marvin's prints would be on it." Gavin swallowed. "So next time you think someone's too old to know what they're doing, ask yourself how old this building is, and how it's still standing." A beat. Then Gavin did something unexpected. He stood up, walked out the office. An hour later, Robert passed by Marvin's station and saw Gavin handing him a cold bottle of Coke and asking questions about wiring panels. Robert kept walking, didn't say a word. Later that evening, Naya called him from her office upstairs. She was holding something in her hands, a rolled-up blueprint from one of the old archives. "Uncle Rob," she said, unrolling it across the table. "You see this?" Robert stepped in and looked. It wasn't a floor plan. It was a sketch, dated and faded. It showed an early idea of the building, one that included classrooms, a community space, a small library, handwritten notes along the side. Start with shelter, grow with purpose. That's your handwriting, isn't it? She asked. Robert exhaled. It was the original plan. I drew that the year I bought it. Why didn't you build it? He paused. No one wanted to invest in things they couldn't monetize. Nia touched the paper softly. I do. And in that moment, something shifted. Because maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe the blueprint they all ignored could finally live. They broke ground on the third-floor community space that spring. No ribbon cutting, no press releases. Just 3 contractors, 2 former tenants who volunteered their weekends, and a woman with vision, Nia, holding her tablet and blueprint like a new kind of torch. Robert stood off to the side, leaning on a railing, watching the future rise from old dust. The old office walls had come down quickly. Where sleek desks and flimsy co-working booths once stood, they were framing out a multi-purpose room, one for free workshops, after-school coding clubs, quiet book nooks, and small business incubators. The space he once hoped for now becoming, not through luck, but through legacy. A few weeks later he came in early, earlier than usual. The sky was still dark and the streetlights flickered like they weren't quite sure morning was real yet. He unlocked the rooftop garden himself, the key still heavy in his palm, like it remembered every lock it had turned over the years. He sat on the bench facing east, back straight, hands folded. The skyline blinked awake in the distance, lights blinking on like applause. A soft voice joined him. Didn't think you'd be up here this early. He turned. Nia was wrapped in a thick shawl, coffee in hand. She sat beside him like it was the most natural thing. I always come up here on closing days, he said. She looked at him. You're leaving. He didn't answer right away. I'm not needed like I was, he said softly. And that's a good thing. Nia's eyes filled. This place is you. No, he corrected gently. This place is what I made. But it's you now. She looked out at the city, breathing through the ache in her chest. So, what happens next? Robert stood slowly, joints creaking. He reached into his coat and handed her a slim envelope. What's this? The final transfer paperwork, he said. Building's yours. She blinked. You mean? I already signed it. Full ownership. Given's trust still holds the name for history's sake, but the power, the keys, the blueprint, all yours. Tears fell, quiet and proud. Uncle Rob. He stepped forward and touched her shoulder. Make them see us, Nia, not just the shine, the sweat, the roots. That night he left the building through the side door. Same steps, same weight, different air. No fanfare, no speech. Just a man in a wool coat walking off into the dusk with dignity. The security guard nodded as he passed. Robert nodded back. The street lamp flickered. He smiled. Weeks later, a new plaque appeared in the building lobby. The Givens Center, once mistaken, now remembered. For those who build in silence and those who rise because of them. Beneath it, in tiny letters, he swept the floors, then gave us the ceiling. Ending reflection. They called him the janitor, but he held the keys, built the foundation, and walked away without needing applause, because greatness doesn't shout, it builds.